Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Pavlova Christmas tree. That's right, not only is this fun and easy to make dessert gorgeous and delicious, it is also light and refreshing, which makes it a perfect thing to serve after one of those heavy holiday meals, especially if you have leftover cranberry sauce from Thanksgiving. And if you don't worry, we'll show you how to make some from scratch. But first things first, and we'll start with our meringue. And for that we will need 3 egg whites, which are most commonly separated with the old shell-to-shell method, which works great. But when I worked in restaurants, I usually did it through my fingers like this, which is probably quicker if you're doing a whole bunch. And yeah, some people like to crack the eggs in the bowl and then remove the yolks with their fingers, but I've always thought that's kind of risky, so I usually use one of these 2 methods. And no matter how you decide to do it, make sure your eggs are at room temperature, since room temp egg whites whip up much better than cold egg whites. But before we start whipping those up, we want to mix a couple teaspoons of cornstarch into our white sugar, because we definitely want this pre-mixed before we start trying to add it in. And yes, things are going to look a little smoky, but don't worry, that's normal. And that's it once mixed, and after the dust settles, we'll go back to our room temp egg whites and start whipping those on high speed. And for this dessert, using a hand mixer is totally fine. Okay, for things like soufflés, I usually do it by hand with a whisk, since you do get a little more volume. But for a pavlova, that really doesn't matter as much. What does matter, though, is forgetting the pinch of salt and cream of tartar, which I didn't notice, even though they were only like a foot away from me. So I added those in and continued mixing. And yes, the pinch of cream of tartar is optional, but it really does help stabilize the meringue. And if you have some in the pantry, go ahead and add a pinch. But anyway, what we'll do is whip these egg whites until they're nice and foamy and have about doubled in size, at which point we'll start adding in our sugar cornstarch mixture, about a tablespoon or so at a time. And after each addition, we'll whip that for a little bit before adding the next tablespoon. And yes, I fully admit I'm terrible at this. I always try to add too much too fast, which will kind of weigh things down, and it will take longer to get where we want to go. So please do as I say, and not as I usually do, and just add that in a little bit at a time. And then what we'll do once the last of that's been transferred in is stop and add the last 2 ingredients, which is a small splash of pure real vanilla extract, as well as a little bit of plain white vinegar, which, like the cream of tartar, helps stabilize the meringue. And then we will simply keep beating on high speed until our meringue gets nice and thick and glossy. And if we stop and pull the beaters out of the mixture, whatever shape is formed will stay exactly in that shape and not move. Okay, if those peaks kind of fall over and slump down, keep mixing. But mine were perfect, so we're going to spin any excess meringue off the beaters, at which point this stuff is ready to transfer onto a parchment-lined sheet pan, which I'm going to use a pastry bag for with a star tip. But you can definitely just use a couple spoons to do this as well. Right, the piping bag just looks cooler and is faster and much better. But other than that, there's not a huge advantage. But either way, we'll start by making a circle about 2.5 to 3 inches across, followed by another slightly smaller circle, and then a slightly smaller circle than that. And then for my 5th and final piping, I'm just going to do a small kiss, which is going to be the top of our tree. And by the way, as you'll see when we build our pavlova, I only ended up using 4 layers. But as I was piping this, I wasn't sure how many layers I was going to do. So I played it safe to make sure I had enough. Which reminds me, this much egg white's probably going to give you enough for 6 trees, with possibly a little bit of meringue left over. So in the empty spaces, feel free to pipe a few extra kisses, since those will make for a great chef snack later. And to save time, I'm just going to do 1 pan, but in real life you can do both at the same time. And that's it. Once piped, we can transfer that into the center, or the upper center of a 250-degree oven, for about 1 hour and 15 minutes, or until the surface of our meringues are dry to the touch, at which point we're going to turn off our oven, and then, very important, we're going to stick a wooden spoon in there so we have about 1 inch or so crack to let a little bit of the heat out, and we'll leave those like that for at least an hour to cool slowly and continue to dry out and get nice and crispy. And while we're waiting for that, if we need some, let's go ahead and make our cranberry sauce, which we'll do with some fresh cranberries, as well as some white sugar, some orange zest, 1 star anise, plus a little pinch of salt, before we finish off with some freshly squeezed orange juice. And once all that's in there, we'll set our heat to medium-high, and we'll wait for this to start to simmer, at which point we'll give it a stir. And personally, I like a fairly simple cranberry sauce. But of course, if you want to add some other flavorings or spices to this, go ahead. I mean, you are after all the Post Malone of what to spoon over your baked sugar foam. And speaking of facial markings, be careful not to get your face too close to the pan, because as this comes up to temp, some of these cranberries are going to start to pop and explode. All right, let me have you listen to that for a little bit. So yes, if your face is too close, it could be a problem, so be careful. And if you want, you can cover this for a few minutes until all those have popped open, which, by the way, is the point we're trying to get to. And then once virtually all the berries have split open, we will cook this for just a few more minutes, just until those juices reduce a little bit and things start getting a little bit syrupy. But I really do think we should stop before every single cranberry falls apart. Unless you want it that way, which is fine. But I prefer to stop at about this point, where, like I said, the juices have thickened up just a little bit, and our berries are soft, but they are not completely fallen apart. And that's it. We'll simply turn off the heat and let that cool completely, and then refrigerate this mixture until we need it. And then we'll head back to our meringues, which have cooled in the oven for an hour. And if everything's gone according to plan, they should still be fairly light, with just an ever so slight toasted appearance. And yes, you can toast them darker if you want using a hotter oven, or keep them whiter using a lower oven. But for me, this is perfect. And after cooling, they should be very crisp, especially the smallest pieces. And by the way, in the biggest pieces, it might be a little bit chewy in the center, which is totally fine. And that's it. To build our Pavlova Christmas tree, we'll take one of the big pieces, and then pipe over or spoon on some whipped cream, which could also be some plain yogurt if you want. And once that's been applied, we'll transfer over a nice big spoon of our cranberry compote, which is just a fancy culinary term for a cranberry sauce. And then we'll go ahead and top that with some chopped pistachio, which is going to give us that gorgeous red, white, green, Christmassy look. And then to finish the layer, we'll do one more small dollop of our whipped cream, at which point we'll top that with a slightly smaller meringue. And we will continue building these layers in the same order, which could have been 5 layers for me. But as you'll see, I just decided to go with 4 meringues, since I thought I had achieved the perfect Christmas tree shape. And yes, some of your chopped nuts are going to fall off. And if they do, just pick them up and place them back on, wherever you feel they're the most visually advantageous. And by the way, I'm going to give you the procedure for the whipped cream in the written recipe, which contains exactly 1 ingredient, cold heavy cream. All right, never under any circumstances buy whipped topping, since it's filled with things you do not want to eat. But anyway, after I finished that 3rd layer, I decided this was ready to finish up and top off. So I took a little bit more of the cranberry mixture and dripped some here and there. Because we must. We have to have some sexy drips. And that's it. After fussing around for a little bit, I piped down the last little dollop of whipped cream, and then topped it with one of our small crunchy kisses, at which point I transferred that to a plate to do some final touches, since like most people, I'm never satisfied. So I did go ahead and do a few more drips of cranberry sauce, including one on the plate I decided I did not like. So I cleaned that up, using my finger because nobody's watching. Or if people are watching, be a pro and use a towel. And then to finish this off in true magazine cover style, we will give that a dusting of powdered sugar to simulate, of course, some freshly fallen snow. And once I did that, I took way too many pictures before grabbing a fork so I could get this Christmas tree into me. And I literally took this from the top and ate that crunchy kiss first, with just a little touch of that tart cranberry sauce, which, as I will explain in a second, is just an absolutely perfect pairing. And then let me go ahead and press this down and cut this in half with my fork, so you can sort of see what's going on. And yes, the inside does look like a piece of cake, but since it's fat-free and mostly air, it is much, much lighter than cake. And yes, I was a little stingy with the cranberry sauce, so at some point I'm going to have to spoon a little more on. But anyway, like I said, even with the richness from the whipped cream, this really is a very light, refreshing dessert, which after one of those big, decadent, heavy holiday meals, I think will be very much appreciated by your guests. And over the years, you've probably heard me talk about contrast being one of the secrets to great cooking. And this delicious dessert is the perfect example. All right, not only do we have a great contrast between the crunchy meringue and our soft whipped cream and soft sticky fruit, But we have an incredible contrast with the flavors as well. Right, on its own, I think meringue is not a great dessert, since it's just too sweet and one-dimensional. But when you combine it with that intense tartness from the cranberries, it becomes perfectly balanced, and it is very, very hard to stop eating. And if you're thinking a spoon might have been a better choice here, I was kind of thinking the same thing. But no matter what you use to eat this, it is fun and easy to make, and as I've already mentioned a few times, delicious and gorgeous, which is why I really do hope you give it a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.